Hi everybody, this is Sherry, and I'm here with the second takeaway that I got when I was helping my dad after he had his hip replaced. Now the first takeaway was all about breathing, and we know how important breathing is for our living as well as for our healing. But this second takeaway was all about the health of our joints and what happens to our joints as we age. Well, I'll tell you the very first thing that happens. We have used our joints, we've misused our joints, and maybe we've abused our joints over all the years that we've been living on this planet. And that added up into many, many birthdays can cause a little bit of issues with our joints. So if you're in between the ages of 50 and 100, you probably have something going on in your joints, if not a couple of joints as well. So let's talk a little bit about the use of our joints. We use them all the time. We use them to walk, we use them to reach, we use them to grab, we use them to hold. All of the joints basically bear weight as well as create strength as we carry things as well. And as we locomote with our legs and we move with our arms, we are using our joints. So that's use. And again, as many birthdays as we have, we're going to be using them a little bit more. Now, misuse. Where does misuse come into? Maybe we do something very awkward and we hold that awkward position for too long, maybe while we're bearing weight, maybe while we're doing an activity. So that can happen a lot maybe at the computer. We might misuse our shoulder joint by taking our mouse in our hand and moving that shoulder forward and then spending hours and hours and hours doing that motion. You can see how my shoulder joint is out of alignment as I'm doing that. And the last thing is abuse. Yes. Abuse is anything that goes to the extreme. So it could be running marathons, and I'm sorry to diss any of those marathon runners out there, but just keep that in mind. Be very, very cautious and careful that you don't misuse your joints. Rest and heal after you do some really intense activity. So basically, with our joints, we're going to use them, we might misuse them, and we might abuse them. That's going to lead to some issues as we have more birthdays. And the second thing to think about with your joints as we age is our posture and the alignment of our posture and our joints with that posture. And if we're locomoting and we're walking and we're running and we're biking and we're jogging, we need to make sure that our joints are tracking in the great postural alignment. I think that's probably one of the main reasons we get arthritis in our joints is because the tracking pattern is off. And the more often you're going to be taking your steps and doing your activities in the wrong posture alignment, your tracking is going to be off and it's going to throw your joint alignment off. So I always encourage you to look at your posture. I have something called the birthday check. That means every year on your birthday, I want you to stand against the wall, stand up nice and tall and straight, shoulders aligned, hips aligned, feet aligned, knees aligned, and see what part of you touches the wall. Does your head touch? Do your shoulder blades touch? Does the back of your lower back or butt touch? And does your calves touch? All of those will help you in the vertical alignment. And then look at yourself in the mirror. See if you feel like one shoulder is lower than the other, if one hip is lower than the other. That is going to affect how you walk, and it's going to affect your tracking of your joints. And you can imagine if you've been doing that for many years and decades and many birthdays, you're going to have some kind of joint misalignment, and that's going to lead to arthritis, it's going to lead to pain, and maybe it will lead to a hip replacement. Now you think that joint problems as we age comes with just getting older, but guess what? Joint problems can happen when we're young too. It can happen because of injuries. Sports injuries are very common. A lot of times knee problems, hip problems, ankle problems. I grew up in the 70s. I was a gymnast in high school, and some of my favorite gymnasts were Kathy Rigby, Nadia Comaneci, Olga Korbut, and Mary Lou Retton. But when I read that Mary Lou Retton, the one who got the 10s across the board, you guys, and the all around, had to get a hip replacement when she was in her 40s, I'm thinking, it's because she probably used it a lot, maybe misused it, but maybe she had some falls in there somewhere down the line. I know when I was a gymnast and we were practicing, we did a lot of falls. Any kind of injury can trigger a little bit of issues in a joint. Pain, maybe structural issues, and if we don't get those things fixed at those times of the injury, then that can lead to tracking problems, right? Because you might favor one side than the other because we've injured it, and now the other joint and the other side is taking the heat for that. So injuries can be car accidents, falling down, anything like that that can create a little bit of a jog, I'm going to say, in the tracking and the alignment of a joint. If we don't heal right, that's why physical therapy is so important, you guys. If you get physical therapy, don't skip out on it. It's really important because they're going to watch you and make sure that when you're healing your injury, it's going to heal in the right pattern and in the right way. And the scar tissue, if there's any that forms in there, it's going to form in the right way to support your joint to make it nice and healthy. So of course, injuries come into play when we talk about the degradation of our joints over our birthdays. And lastly, this is the one I love so much because this is where yoga comes in. As we age, there's going to be some degeneration in our bodies. I hate to tell you that. It's going to happen. We're not going to be all spring chickens forever and ever. Amen. Things are going to degrade. One of the things that degrade is the connective tissue around your joint. Now, this is what I learned when I went to the doctor's appointment with my dad. And what he said about the hip replacement is we're going to be putting a fake joint in there. Now, a real joint has a lot of connective tissue that keeps that joint stable, mobile, flexible. But you're not going to have that when you have a hip replacement. You're not going to have those nice strong ligaments. You're not going to have those tendons that attach up into and secure that hip a little bit tighter in place. So what we're going to rely on is that the muscles around your hips are going to get strong and stabilize that hip joint. So this is what happens. As we age, those ligaments and those tendons, they get a little rigid and maybe tight. Maybe they tear a little bit. Maybe they get damaged. I think about a ligament as like a rubber band. It binds things really nicely, but as time goes on and years go on and use goes on, that rubber band can get a little worn. It can get a little frayed, and it can get a little stiff, and it doesn't have the resiliency anymore. But if that rubber band was meant to wrap around something and hold it secure, like around your knee and around your joint and around your shoulder, those ligaments become a little more lax or damaged, then that joint is going to be a little, maybe let's say floppy in there, a little less secure. Guess what? The good news is this. If those ligaments can't support you 100%, the muscles around you can. So that means we got to strengthen the muscles around the joints. And especially the joints that are what we would say maybe not 100% anymore. So when I teach my chair yoga class, I always like to ask people, where are their problems? This is what I hear. Knees, oh yeah. Shoulders, for sure. And hips. Those three. These are joints that we use constantly all the time. As we age, those joints are going to change. They're going to either degrade over time, they're going to degrade with use, misuse, abuse, and of course, the tracking patterns that we do and any injuries or accidents that we have had. We have a story in our bodies, don't we? We do. Now, let me tell you what happened to my dad and really why he got to this point of needing a hip replacement. My dad was a career carpenter, construction guy, and as he got older, he knew he couldn't keep up that wear and tear on his joints, up and down, back and forth, carrying loads. So he got into the management side of the Carpenters Union. So he tells me that when he was in his 30s or so, he actually fell 3 or 4 stories from a scaffolding when he was working as a carpenter. And he thinks that was maybe the beginning of some of his issues. My dad got a double knee replacement at the same time when he was 72 years old. And he said he felt that before he got his knee replaced, both of them, he was compromising the way he walked. Of course you would, because it hurts, especially if both knees hurt. He knew he was compromising his gait a little bit, but he didn't really realize it was compromising his hip joint. This is the thing. If you have one joint that's a little bit weak, usually it's the joint on the top or the joint below it that takes a little bit more of the labor, of the burden. That one's going to wear out, and maybe the tracking pattern there will be affected. So that's what happened. He kind of wore out his right hip, maybe a little bit more than his left hip. So when we went into the doctor, and the doctor assessed whether he really did have hip arthritis and if it was bad enough for a knee replacement. It's hard to know. A doctor doesn't really know. They can take x-rays and see if things are broken. They can look at soft tissue with an MRI, but they really can't look quite in that joint capsule to know, is there friction and is there rubbing inside that ball and socket? But this is what the doctor said, and I tell you, it's something that really sticks in my mind because now I really understand how painful arthritis can be. The doctor said this. He said, arthritis in a joint feels like your elbow rubbing against cement. Doesn't that sound painful? That sounds super painful. So if you get to that point in any of your joints, especially load-bearing joints, which is going to be your knees and your hips mostly, but shoulders too, if you get that feeling like your elbow is rubbing against cement, then you've got a pretty harsh case of arthritis. And the doctor said, he's ready. He's ready for a hip replacement. So my dad did. It's been a month since he had his hip replaced. He's doing great. He's not on a walker. He's not on a cane. And he is doing an amazing job. And guess what? He's doing his exercises. So the third takeaway I'm going to be sharing real soon is I am going to show you the exercise routine that the physical therapist gave to my dad, but I'm putting a little yoga spin on it too. I looked at the whole handout. I understood what muscles were being strengthened, what muscles were being activated, and how many times and at what pace, all of that, and I put together a nice little sequence for hip strength. Now remember, this sequence can be for anybody who wants to keep their hips nice and solid and strong so that you can maybe delay a hip replacement or maybe never get one. But for anybody who is recuperating from a hip injury or a hip replacement, these exercises, or what I'll say, yoga asanas, will be for you as well. I've been doing them in my classes recently and the students really love them. So I think you'll like them too. So stay tuned for my third takeaway. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste.